Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Against the Grain podcast. Today, I have a very special guest with me, Andrea Santillano. Hi, Andrea. How are you?
Hi, I'm good.
I'm so excited to be able to interview you and hear your story and just to hear what's going on in your life. So, Andrea, we see you as just this amazing worship leader. You are the worship director for Harvest Time, so that's so awesome. Tell us, what was it like, Drea, like growing up for you? How did you get to this point of being just an awesome worship leader? You have a lot going on right now in your life, and we'll get to that a little bit later. But give us a little bit of a background story so we can truly understand like what it took for you to get to this point. So were you always involved in the church, or like how did that start for you? Were you like brought up in the church, or do you have like this crazy testimony? Like share with us a little bit your upbringing.
Okay, so I grew up in the church. Since I was little, my mom, she always took us to church. And so we actually grew up in a Spanish church, which is pretty amazing because I feel like now looking back or looking at where I am now, I can see the fruit of what was given to me, just growing up in that Hispanic church. They're super passionate people. Like I was so used to just seeing people laid out in the spirit, see people, just like the manifest presence of God. I was so used to seeing that literally like my whole childhood. And so, so I grew up in the church, and up until I was about 16, my parents got a divorce, and it was really, really, really hard for like our family. Some stuff went down, and they sat us down and basically told us that, they were no longer going to be together, and that they still loved each other, but that they just, sometimes like people fall out of love. Mm-hmm. And I remember my mom just said, but that doesn't change anything. Like we still love you, and, we're going to still, we still love each other. We're still going to be, like here for you, blah, blah, blah. And yeah, it was really, really crazy. Like, coming from growing up, knowing, having like a normal household, like having my both parents. My dad actually was a truck driver, so he was never really home. Like he would come maybe like, he would be gone for sometimes like even like a whole week, and then he would come on the weekends and we would spend time with him and stuff. But like growing up, he wasn't really around because of work, but I never felt like, I never lacked like a father's love. Like he was always there. He would, we would always call him. Sometimes we would even go on trips with him and stuff. And yeah, that's just basically was my childhood. And so it was really hard when they separated because, well, one, the circumstances behind it, I have forgiven my dad and everything's good. My dad's an amazing father, but unfortunately, he ended up cheating on my mom, and because of that, that's why like the split happened or whatever. And so I had, that kind of goes into like my story of having after 16, I just had a lot of unforgiveness and a lot of like I didn't trust women, I didn't trust men, and so I just like went crazy after high school. I was around like 18, 19, I started getting into more than just like drinking. I started, doing drugs and just hanging around like the wrong people, I guess. And it was just trying to fill that void of like not having my dad, because after I turned 16, he kind of, was doing his own thing. And because of that, it kind of like messed up our relationship with him, and so it was just really hard. We didn't really have like the best relationship anymore, and so and then with the unforgiveness, it was just really hard with that. And so we went through a lot those like few years after I saw my mom go through really major depression, and to the point where like she didn't want to live anymore, and she got like addicted to sleeping pills. Like, so we, for those like years after, went through a lot. Being that young and seeing your mom go through that was really, really hard. Yeah. And so also because of that, she had, stopped going to church, and like it was just like everything just kind of changed. Like it was from having a family, a good family, having my mom, my dad, my brother, my sister living together. We had our dog. I had my own room. To the divorce happened. We had to move to my grandparents' house. We had to literally share rooms, and we had to even give our dog to like one of my aunts. And so literally our whole life just changed. And so it was really, really, really hard. And then around like 19 is when, like I said, I started to kind of get into drugs and stuff like that. And then like 20, the same thing, just kind of, and I would go to church here and there. Cause we used to go to this church, called, Church of the Redeemer in Baldwin Park. And they're amazing. Cause through everything, they were always there for me and everything. But I was always kind of like in and out. Like I would go and then I would be committed for a little bit and then I would just stop. But I feel like even when I was committed, I didn't really understand what it was to fully be committed, like I thought like, oh yeah, well, I'm coming, but it wasn't until I finally was like tired of going back and forth. And then when I turned 22, I just like basically hit rock bottom. I, was living my life, like I said, doing all these things. I was being promiscuous. I was, just trying to fill the void with anything, like with guys, with drugs, with friends, with just even just trying to get attention. Like I remember, well, back then it was like Facebook was like big, and I had so many friends on Facebook. And I remember my thing was like, oh, I'm gonna post like, pictures of myself, like looking, like not modest, I guess. And it was just to get attention. And I remember like that's just what fueled me. Like what made me feel worthy was like guys telling me that I was pretty and telling me that, I had a nice body, or like just saying certain things to me that I just felt like it filled that void, And then because of what my dad did, I didn't have trust in men. So I had this mindset where I was like, oh, I don't care. Like I'm dating you, but I don't care. Like I'm going to talk to these guys and I don't care. Like I really just didn't care. And but obviously deep down I did, I didn't want to be like that. I didn't want to be chained up like that, but I just felt like I just had no hope. And so when I hit rock bottom, I was like, okay, like I'm just so tired of this. I'm tired of feeling empty. I'm tired of feeling anxious all the time, and just like this fear that would just grip me. And I had this like encounter. It was like super demonic. One time my neck got stiff or something, and I had went to my grandma and she gave me like a painkiller, but it was like a really strong painkiller. And at the same time, I remember one of my cousins was like, oh, because we used to always like smoke together and stuff, and he was like, oh, like this, like if you smoke weed, it'll help like relax your body, blah blah blah. And I was like, oh, okay. So I went outside and I did that. And I don't know if it was like the mixture, but I know it was like obviously spiritual too. But like I started freaking out and I started seeing things. I started like, it was like this, like, it literally felt like I opened like a portal to like demonic. Wow. And I was like, I remember being in my room and I was freaking out. And I was telling, my brother was there and I was like, Andrew, like, please just, and it's crazy that even then I knew that the word of God was powerful. And I remember telling him like, just read the Bible. Like, I don't care what you read, just read it out loud. Cause I was freaking out. And I remember like closing all the windows because every time I looked out, I would literally see demons outside. Wow. And they literally look like, the way that I describe it, the way it looked, like they look like, when like lions are like about to get their prey and how they kind of just like walk slowly, like that's how they looked. Wow. Like they were waiting for something to like just go and like get me, Yeah. And so I remember like I ended up closing the windows and I told my brother like, please just like read the Bible. And I believe he was reading out of Psalms, but like he was just like reading the word over me. And finally, like after he was reading, I felt like I just kind of calmed down. And then I I remember laying down and then I fell asleep. And then when I woke up, I was thinking, okay, I'm going to go to sleep. And when I wake up, I'm going to feel better. I woke up and still had that yeah. And
Oh my
I was
goodness.
sober. Like, cause my mind, I was like, oh, I'm just high. Like maybe that's why I'm freaking out. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to lay down. I'm going to go to sleep. And then when I wake up, I'm going to feel better. So again, like I said, I went to sleep, and when I woke up, I felt the same heaviness, the same darkness. And so that's when I knew. I was like, this is spiritual. Like,
Yeah.
this is not just like me being high and like I'm just freaking out because I smoked something, and I mixed something. Like I knew that it was spiritual. And I remember the feeling of like the enemy was like, you're going to hell. Like, I'm going to take you. Like, you're going to die. Like, I literally felt like I was like,
Wow.
I'm going to die and I'm not going to, like, it felt so, I've never felt so hopeless in my life. Like, where there like literally like no hope whatsoever. I had no hope. And so, yeah, I went through that. Because of that, I remember that was probably like a Sunday or something, or a Monday. And then that Wednesday we had church service. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to go like with my brother. Cause my brother was serving God, and like he was on the worship team and all of that. So I was like, okay, I'm going to go. And so I remember I went, and our pastor at the time, his name was Pastor Junior. Shout out to Pastor Junior. He's amazing, an amazing man of God that really, like, even when I was like living in the world, he was the pastor that I would call at 2 a.m. Like, I would literally call him and be
Really?
like crying and telling him that I was going through something, and he was always there, never judged me, always just would pray for me, and stuff like that. And so, but anyways, I remember going to church, and there was like an altar call, and he basically said, like, I feel like there's someone here that wants to take their life. And because I was dealing with like suicidal thoughts as well because of everything that was happening.
Yeah.
And so I was like, okay, like, this is my chance, this is what I felt like Holy Spirit was tugging on my heart, like, just come up here.
Yeah.
And so I was like, okay. So I walked up there, and, he started like praying for everybody. And as soon as he got to me, he put his hand on me, and now looking back, I'm like, whoa, that was deliverance. Like, I literally got delivered. But he put his hand on me, and I just started weeping. Like, every hurt, like all the pain that I had gone through from 16 until that time, like, I just felt like it was all like bottled up, and it like finally just like came out, and I was crying. And he was just speaking life over me. I don't even really remember what he said, but I just remember him speaking life, and just feeling for the first time in a long time, the presence of God. And I just felt like, oh my gosh, like, you're here, And that basically was the start to, my whole journey. And, but yeah, that's basically like my testimony. I got saved then. And then from there, I started, coming to church. And then goes into like meeting Manny and all of that stuff, but we'll get into that. And but yeah, that was basically what happened. I encountered God, and I was like, okay, this is it. And I haven't looked back since. I mean, I've gone through things, obviously, but I have not, obviously, like, it's just been like going forward, and so yeah.
That's so good. So that moment that you felt like you got delivered at that altar call, were you, did you decide to continuously go to Redeemer after that and then start serving the Lord? Is that how that happened from that moment forward? Or from that moment were you still like in and out, or was that your like turning point?
No, that was like my turning point.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's so
like,
amazing.
I had gotten maybe like 3 months, because I'm telling you, there's like so many layers to my testimony, because it was always like I would go to church, I would get, like saved, and then I would go back. So it was always kind of like, I think before that point, it was always like back and forth, like 1 foot in, 1 foot out. And then I was like on the worship team for a little bit, and then I would backslide, and then I would just go back. But it was always just like, I knew that it was always going to be there. Like, I knew that church, my leaders were going to be there. I knew that obviously my brother was like serving. So I always felt safe to go back when I was going through it. But I think up until that point, that is when I hit like my lowest. And that's when I was like, okay, I'm done.
Yeah.
And well, I didn't even share this, but another big part of it, at the time I was dating this guy, and it was like, we were probably dating for like 3 months. I had actually gotten baptized in April, because I got saved in like finally, like officially in August of 2011. But in April, I had like given my life to God, and I even got baptized.
Wow.
But then I backslid for 3 months because, you know, that happens. It's like you get saved, but then like it's like a tug of war, you know, with your soul.
Yes.
And so for 3 months I backslid, and I was dating this guy. And I remember like when I was finally like, I'm done. That was the only thing that I was like still holding on to. And I actually had a dream, which was the craziest encounter I've ever had. I'll say for sure, the craziest encounter I've ever had. I remember I was sleeping, and I had this dream where I was, for some reason I was in my old house, but I was like on the ground, and I just remember hearing Andrea. And it was like, have you seen The Prince of Egypt? No? Okay. You have to watch
Manny's
it.
gonna get me for that one.
Yeah. No, you have to watch it. Like,
I think I might have seen it when I was a kid, but I don't remember. But like I haven't, like I don't remember any of the movie.
yeah. Okay. So you have to watch it because there's a part in the movie where God calls out to Moses, and it's, you know, in the Bernie Bush part.
Yeah.
And he calls him, and he's like, Moses, you know?
Yeah.
And that's literally, that voice is what I heard in my dream.
Wow.
It was so crazy. It's kind of cute the way God like even speaks to you, because the way that I love that movie. Like when I was growing up and stuff, like I really love that movie. So the fact that he used that voice was just like so special to me. But yeah, so like he called my name like that, and he said Andrea. And I remember like I was sitting on the floor, and I remember like looking up, and I was like, oh my gosh, like someone called my name. Excuse me. So I go back down, and I'm just like, I have my eyes closed, and then I hear him again. He's like, Andrea. And I'm like, oh my God, like something's like, who's calling me? And then again, I go back down, and then he calls me a third time. And the third time, I remember just like looking up, and he said, take off your sandals. And it was exactly like Moses. Like I took off my sandal, and he said, my sandals, and he said that it was holy ground. And so I was like, okay. So I remember taking off my sandals, and I knew in that moment that it was the Lord. Like I didn't even ask, like, who are you? It's like, I knew it was him after the third time. And then after that, I take off my shoes, and then I just put my head to the ground. And then he says, let him go. And it was like literally like the last, like I'm telling you, it was the last thing that was was not letting me like fully like give my heart to God, you know?
Yeah.
And then he said it again. And I remember crying because I was like it's hard, you know, because I really liked the guy, you know? And I was like, it's hard. And he was like, let him go.
Wow.
And then he said it again. So he said it 3 times. He called my name 3 times, and then he said, let him go 3
Wait,
times.
was this a dream or this is real life?
No, it was a dream. But as I was waking up, it was like, it felt like my brother was just talking to me. Like it felt like that. Like it was like I was asleep, but I heard him so loud that as soon as he said, the last time he said, let him go, I cried, and I said, okay. And I literally woke up in that instant, and I was like, oh my gosh, like he just talked to me. Like it had just happened, you know? Like it was like, I literally felt like he was in my room, and you know, like when you're sleeping, but like you could hear people talking, that's how it felt. And so I wake up, and it's 5 a.m. And like literally like 5 minutes later, my brother gets up to get ready to go to school, because he would go really early to school. So he was getting ready, and I just remember like, Andrew, and I was like, God, I literally just heard God's voice, and I started telling him everything.
Wow.
And I was like freaking out. I was like, oh my gosh. And literally just his voice, that was all I needed to hear. And I was like, okay, I'm done.
Yeah.
And then that's when like everything changed.
That's so crazy. Thank you so much for sharing that you went through this even after you got baptized. Because I think like it's so important that we understand that like, yes, we get baptized, and that's amazing. That's so beautiful, so beautiful. But like I even went through something super similar. Like after I got baptized, I backslid and I didn't tell anyone about it because I was super ashamed. Like I was so ashamed of it because I was like, well, the enemy was getting in my head like, oh, you just got baptized and now here you are backsliding. And it was over a guy too, you know? So like the enemy was really getting in my head. And it's so funny because same thing, like it was like, I didn't know what to do. And then literally God sent pastor to like give me a word about it. And I was like, okay, God, I hear you. And then that was like it, you know? So, but it's like, it's so easy because I understand what you went through. Like, I can't even imagine like how you said that tug and pull of your soul, literally. Like there really is a tug and pull in the spiritual realm for your soul, especially in those first like couple months when you're really truly trying to walk it out with the Lord and figure out your relationship with the Lord. And, I felt the heaviness of that, you know, because like the enemy came into my life after I got baptized too. And like I fell and I understand how like crazy that tug and pull is. But it's like, it's so true. Like God will come to you in a way that you will be able to understand what he's saying to you and like receive his word. But that's so awesome. Thank you for sharing that. Seriously. And it's like, just to like give anyone who is maybe watching this and going through something like that, like maybe they just got baptized and they're backsliding and they're feeling shame. It's like, there's no shame, you know, like, like the enemy just wants to come after your soul. And there's no shame, there's no condemnation. Just like give it to God, like repent and give it to God. But it's so beautiful. But that's so amazing. So then you let him go after that. You're like,
after
I'm
that,
done.
I was like, bye. I deleted my Facebook. I like went full like I ignored, like I literally cut everyone out of my life. Like I was so done.
Yeah. That's so crazy. That's so beautiful though. And then so you're at Redeemer, you're like fully giving it all to the Lord. And then so you started getting into worship there at Redeemer. Is that where your worship journey started for you?
Yeah. I mean, more like I was kind of like my brother's shadow. Like I was like, he'll do everything. Like I'm cool right here. Like I led songs here and there. But it wasn't like I was like, it wasn't like I was leading, like he was mostly like the one that was doing everything. And I was just kind of like there to help, and I was cool. I was like, this is cool. Like I love doing like BGVs and like all of that.
That's so cool. And like for those who don't know, you're a twin, which is so awesome. And you guys are both worship leaders. Like that is so cool. So when you guys were growing up, would you guys like sing together, or how did you guys both discover that you have this like gift of singing?
No, my brother never sang. Like
really?
I was the only singer for literally most of our childhood. I was my mom said I was like 3 when I started singing. I remember I was like I remember singing when I was like 4. Like around 4 is when I remember like little things that I would do. Like I would, you know, make my family sit down and I would like set up like a fake stage and I would perform for them and stuff. And it was always like Jesus songs. And I would always, I would also preach. I remember I would like pretend I was like a preacher and stuff. But my brother, when we were 17, my mom wanted, or 17? I think I was 6. No, I think when we were 16, we had a neighbor that he did, I think he played guitar, played all these like different instruments, and somehow I don't know how it happened, but he basically was like, oh, you know, like I could do lessons or whatever for like, I don't even remember how much it was. But my mom was like, yeah, like, you know, if you guys want to do it. And so me and my brother were like, yeah, cool. So my brother wanted to learn the guitar, and I was like, oh yeah, like I'll do like the piano, which is crazy because I didn't stick with it, which I wish I would have stuck with it, because I just wish I did. But I didn't. And my brother, he learned guitar, and after he learned guitar, like just little by little, I would hear him like sing here and there, and I was like, so like at church, he was always just like the guitar player, but then like little by little, like once from like 17 until like we were like 22, he started developing more as a singer, and like and yeah, I was like, whoa, like he can actually sing. And so we would do like YouTube things together. Sometimes we would do like little like covers, like it was all like Jesus songs, but like Christian songs, but yeah, we would do it together and stuff. And like that's basically just what happened, like he started later and I was doing it like our whole, so our whole lives we didn't, I was literally the only one that was
No
into singing and stuff. Yeah.
That's so awesome. And now look at you guys. You guys are up there worshiping together sometimes. That's so cool.
Yeah.
So awesome. So take us into how you became like that worship leader. And then Manny also mentioned on his podcast that you guys were like the youth leaders together. Manny gave us his story, but we need to hear your side of the story. How did you meet Manny? How did you feel after getting that Frisbee in the face? Let us know, how was that story for you?
Okay. So this is what happened. So when I was 16, I went to this youth camp, and it's kind of weird, but the way that where I was in my grade, because I was 16 but I was a senior, because my mom had put us in, which I understand now. She put us in early, me and my brother, because she was probably like, you guys need to go to school already. But yeah, so we went in when we were 4. So we were 4 years old when we were in kindergarten. Wow. So because of that, when I was a senior, I was 16. So once we graduated, like in the church, it was like, okay, if you graduate, you're out of, being the youth. But because I was 16, I wasn't even 17 yet. Because I was 16, they kind of like made a pass, and they were like, okay, well, you're still 16. Like because I didn't want to go to the next level, because all like my friends were there, and I felt more comfortable with like the youth.
Yeah.
And so I was like, I don't want to like move on to, because then it was the next one was the bridge, and then the bridge was just like college students.
Oh,
but I still felt like I was like I was 16,
yeah.
And I was like, oh, like I want to just like still be in the youth. So my pastor Junior, he was like, fine, okay, you could come, because I really wanted to go to the youth camp, because those youth camps were so like amazing, always fun, and we would always encounter God and stuff. And so at that time, I was actually dating. I was dating this guy, and he was coming too. So then we went together, kind of like, we went together, and I was like, oh, okay, cool. Like because he was still in high school. So I was like, I really want to go. And he was like, fine, you could come.
Yeah.
So he Pastor Junior let me go. And so I went, and I don't remember ever seeing Manny before that, but this is when I like really like knew who he was, because he hit me. But
that opened your eyes.
Yeah. So we were there, we had like this relay thing, and it was kind of just like people were just like having fun or whatever. And I remember I was standing by, I think my ex-boyfriend was like playing basketball, the guy I was dating, and I was like sitting there, and I was just like, just minding my own business.
Yeah.
And I still remember looking and seeing one of Manny's friend. It was him and E-Man, and they're tossing like this, Frisbee.
Yeah.
But I'm like, oh,
E-Man? No way. I didn't know it was E-Man.
Yeah, they were both. I still remember. Dang. And so I was like standing there, and I kept looking, because I was like, hey, like I feel like they're gonna hit me. And of course, out of nowhere, I'm like over here, like just minding my business, and I get hit really hard in my face, like on my forehead. And I was like about to cry. My eyes were, I think I actually did kind of cry, because like my eyes were watery, and I just remember I was like just covering my face. And right away, Manny and E-Man like came running to me, and Manny was like, oh my gosh, like I'm so sorry. And I was like, oh, it's okay. But in my head, I was like, oh, you little kid, like I do not like you right now, like
kid.
Get away from me. And because I really saw him like he was like little to me, because I was already out of high school. And the way that his grade was, he was supposed to be a sophomore, but because of like the time in his birthday or something, he was actually a freshman. So yeah, so we're a year and a half. I'm a year and a half older than him.
Yeah.
But in grades, I was ahead and he was behind.
Oh,
because
okay.
it wasn't because he was like dumb or anything. It was just because his birthday was like in a weird spot.
Yeah.
So that's why like I was like, he's a freshman, and I was already out of high school, So
Dang,
it's kind of weird.
Crazy.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
So I remember thinking like, oh, this little kid, and I was so mad. I remember even telling the guy I was dating, I was like, oh, this little kid, like he hurt me, and I was like so embarrassed, because everybody's like all looking at me, and because of that, that's when I knew, like, obviously then I started like at church, I would see him, and I'm like, oh, that kid, you know?
Yeah.
Like that's how I knew who he was or whatever. And then, but then, you know, like once we started, we grew up a little bit more. He started playing drums for my brother. And of course he got older. So I was like, he's cute, you know? And so I would like always like, I promised there's times that I would go on Wednesdays because I knew he was going to play, you know, cajon, and I would literally like get ready and that was like on my mind. Like I had a crush on him. So
That is so crazy.
yeah. So I always like had this crush on him, and I always just thought he was cute. And I remember one time, which is crazy. I'm like, I literally had no idea that I was being prophetic and I was prophesying. But I remember this one time, it was after church. We're like getting in our cars, and then my brother, or I think I was going with my brother home. And then I was like, oh, no, I think I was leaving. And so I told my brother, I was like, Andrew, I'm like, tell my future boyfriend I said bye. And I remember he got so mad, and he's just like, Andrea, you better not. And I was just like, what? You know, like just being funny.
Yeah.
But I literally had a crush on him. And I remember one time on a Wednesday, I went with one of my friends, like my worldly friends. And this is when I was like backsliding and stuff. But I would go here and there. And I remember I was going with her, and I was like, oh my gosh, okay. Like the guy that's playing cajon, when we walk in, I have a crush on him. Like he's so cute. I think he's so cute. And she was just like, oh my gosh, like, yeah, you know, whatever. So I remember we walked in. And, you know, we sat down, and then after worship, like Manny sat next to me, and I was like so nervous because I was like, oh my gosh, she's sitting next to me. And then I remember we were like, okay, like we're going to take notes. And I remember I was like trying to take notes, but my pen wasn't working. And so I was just like, what the heck? It's not working. And I think like he just like noticed, and he's like, it's not working? And I was like, no, it's not working. But I was like so nervous. I was like, he's talking to me. And then and he's like, oh, here, give it to me. So he gets it, and then, like he licks the tip of it, and then like he does it, and,
No,
and it worked. Yeah. And then when I got home, I was like, no, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. No, but yeah, so like he did that, and I was like, oh, I was like, thanks. Gosh. But even just that little interaction, I was like, oh my gosh, like I'm so nervous. Like I was like probably sweating. Yeah. And yeah, just like after that, like we would like, it was just kind of like, oh, he was like my brother's friend. So we would say hi to each other like that. So like there's times where I would like, you know, if we saw each other, like we walked, you know, across, I mean, if we walked past each other, we would like give each other hugs, but kind of just like, oh, hi. And then like, you know, we would go, but it was always just like, I had this little like crush on him. Yeah. And then I remember for my 21st birthday, we went to this restaurant, and I remember telling my sister, I sat, cause I wanted to sit next to my brother, but he was kind of sitting. So he moved, and then I was like, oh, I'm going to sit next to him. So I went to sit next to him and my sister, and I remember like I turned around and I was like, Amy, and I told her, I was like, I have a crush on him. And she was like, oh, like he's cute. And I was like, he's cute, huh? And then, so then a year later is when I, you know, obviously that's when I got saved. And so that's basically where like our love story started. So I had gotten saved in August, and in August, for those people, like if you know about Greg Laurie and stuff, he does these like stadium events where it's kind of more for like salvations and like new people that don't really know like the Lord and stuff. And or like are kind of new to the faith. And so we would always go, every year we would go. And so my brother was like, hey, I remember him waking me up, and he was like, it was like a Saturday, and he was like, hey, he's like, we're gonna go to, you know, the stadium event. He's like, do you want to go? And I was like, oh, who's gonna go? And he was like, me, you know, his girlfriend, wife now, but his girlfriend at the time, Lauren. He was like, me, Lauren, and this one of our friends, her name was Vanessa, and he's like, oh, and Manny, and that's all he had to say. I was like, I'm like, there.
You should have started with that.
Yeah. And I was like, yeah, like I'll go. And I was so excited because I'm like, oh my gosh, like we're gonna hang out. And so I get ready, whatever, we go. And I remember we pulled up to his house because we were gonna pick him up. We went like you've been to his house, you know how you make that U-turn or whatever. So we made the U-turn, and then we stopped, and then I was like, this is his house? And he was like, yeah. And I was like, are they rich? And he was like, yeah, you know, blah, blah. Like, he was like cracking up because he's like, hi, Andrea. And I was like, dang, like, because they had like a really nice house.
You're like, there's a whole fountain in the front yard.
Because I'm like, I was not used to that at all.
Yeah.
So then he comes out, and I remember I scoot and I go in the middle, and then he comes to sit next to me. And I was like, you smell good. And he was like, thank you.
Oh my gosh.
That was like my little shot. And then after that, we went to the stadium thing. We didn't even sit next to each other, but we sat down, whatever. Mm-hmm. And then on our way home, I remember I shared with them, because it was just an amazing like night. I just remember being so wrecked by God and stuff, and by all the testimonies that we heard. And so I remember like on our way back, we were just kind of sharing about stuff. And then I remember I was like, you guys are my only friends. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, because I literally had nobody. I was like, you guys are my only friends. And Manny, now he told me that like in that moment that God had spoke to him and said like, you're gonna be her friend. And so that's basically what started it. Yeah. And then the next day I was like, hey, do you want to go again? Because it was 2 days. And my brother was supposed to go, but last minute like was like, oh, I can't go. So we ended up going alone. It was just me and him. We went to the event, and for like maybe like 30 to 40 minutes before it started, because we got there pretty early. Mm-hmm. We just talked, and I like shared my whole life with him, and like I don't know, that's just like how it clicked. Yeah. And then we started hanging out, and I was like, okay, I need to know. I was like, Lord, if this isn't for me, please, like, just take these feelings away, because I'm starting to fall for him. And I basically like told him, because my brother had asked me like, oh, do you have feelings for him? So I like, kind of to start it, I was like, okay, this is my moment. I'm going to just tell him. So I was like, hey, like, haha, like my brother asked me like, if I had feelings for you. And then he was like, well, what'd you say? And I was like, oh my gosh, this is the moment of truth. And then so I ended up telling him like, oh, well, and I made it all casual. Like, oh, well, like, I told him that, it's easy to catch feelings, like when you're hanging out and stuff with someone, every day. And then, and he literally writes back, because we're texting each other. He literally wrote back this whole like 3 pages.
Oh my gosh.
Back then it was like we had the flip phones. Yeah. So it would be like you would get like 3 pages of it. And so like he sent this whole thing, and like the first thing he wrote was like, oh my gosh, you're the woman of my dreams.
Oh,
and then he
gosh,
like goes
Manny.
on to tell me he goes on to tell me
cute.
like how much he really like liked me and everything.
Oh, that is so
and
cute.
That's how it started. We started dating, and then like literally 2 weeks of us dating, we fell in love, and he told me he loved me, and then I told him, and then we became boyfriend and girlfriend. We dated for 4 years, and then we finally got married, and we've been married for 7 years now.
That is so awesome. Yeah. Amazing. That's a good story. Manny's was good too, but like I like your side of the story, because like you're like, yeah, and then I liked him and he was so cute, because I'm like, I can relate to that. Like when like you get that giddy, like, oh, he's cute, so that's so awesome. Oh, I love that for you guys. 7 years. That's so awesome. Mm-hmm. And you guys are worshiping together. Mm-hmm. That is so beautiful. Yeah. Wow. So, okay, so now you're fully saved, you have Manny, and then so how does it go from you being a worship leader at Redeemer, right? And now you guys are starting Harvest Time. Because Pastor has shared some stories of like you just not being fully like wanting to worship, or I don't know, maybe I'm butchering the story, but there was like one time where he said that like he made you worship and you started crying. Yes. So share that. Like, what is that like? Yeah. What was that like for you?
I was really, like I said, I was very comfortable with just being like in my brother's shadow. I was like, you are the leader. Like, I'm here to support you. Like, I'll do BGVs my whole life. I'm cool with that. I'll sing here and there. Like I'm cool with that. But when we started the Bible study, me and my brother would lead worship together. But then when Pastor felt like he was being called out of Redeemer, and he was like, okay, we're being called out of our old church. Like, we're going to start this, we're actually going to start a church. Yeah. I remember, it was a Tuesday. I still remember, because that's how traumatic it was for me.
On a Tuesday.
Yes. It was on a Tuesday. And I remember he was like, okay, we're doing this, right? He's like, we're going to start this church. And he's like, and Andrea, he's like, you're gonna lead worship this Sunday. Wow. And my brother didn't feel called to leave Redeemer, our old church. He didn't feel called to it. So I knew it was just gonna be me. Mm-hmm. And so I remember he was like, you're gonna lead this Sunday. And I remember crying and bawling my eyes out when I got home. I was like, I can't do this. I can't do this. How am I going to do this? Like, I need my brother. Like, I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to lead a team. I don't know how to lead, like, I don't know how to lead a team. Like, musically, like, I don't play an instrument. So I was like, I don't know how to, like, lead. Like, it was like this whole, like, thing that happened to me, and I was crying. And I remember crying out to God, and I was just telling him, like, God, I need my brother. Like, I can't do this alone. Like, what am I going to do? And I'm like, you know, having this whole conversation with God, or not really conversation. I was like, just talking to him, and like, and out of nowhere, the Lord spoke to me, and he said, in this next season, he said, you've depended so much on your brother, but in this next season, I want to teach you how to fully depend on me.
Wow.
And I was like, whoa. That's so good. Okay. And in that moment, I just felt like I could do this. Okay, I could do this, you know? And so that Sunday came, and thankfully my cousin, Daisy, the one that passed away, she was also a singer, because, you know, my whole, like, a lot of people in my family, cousins and stuff, are like worship leaders and stuff, which is pretty cool. But she was, you know, I knew that she sang. So I was like, Daisy, you're going to be my BGV. Because before that, she was never singing. It was just me and my brother that would do the Bible studies. We were just singing. We didn't have anyone else that would sing with us. And so literally that Sunday was her first time singing. And I was like, you're going to sing with me. I don't know how it's going to look like, but you're going to sing with me. And I remember we even got like someone else, one of the other girls, to sing with us. And then Manny, he played drums. And then we had someone that we were like, you need to learn how to play guitar. And he literally learned how to play guitar just to be on the worship team.
Really?
Yeah. And then we had a bass player, which was actually Steph, her husband. His name's Heck. So he played bass for us. And then, it was just us. And that Sunday came, you know, we led worship. Look, nothing like it looks now. Like, let me tell you, I had a lot to learn as like a worship leader and stuff. And but that's basically where my journey started. So
wow, that's amazing. Yeah, I always hear that story of like pastor talks about how like, oh, look at her now, and like she was not like this in the beginning, and she would cry, and I was like, that's so hard to believe, like, Drea. So wow, that's so awesome. That is so cool. But now it's like your journey has progressed, and especially this last year, 2022, was a huge year for you. It's like so amazing. I mean, I wasn't there from the beginning, but you know, we get to hear these testimonies of people who have been there with you through the beginning, and to see your journey from, like you were saying, being your brother's shadow and just like crying before worshiping, to now you're signed by Anchored Music, which is amazing. You just released your first single last month, which is so beautiful. So talk to us a little bit about that. Like, what was your journey? How did that happen? Because you've even shared that there was times where you even kind of just like, I wouldn't say doubting, but I guess just questioning, right? Because of the timeline, the timeline that it took to get here. Yeah. So what was that like to get from the worship, like becoming a worship leader, to like now you're signed by Anchored, you have your single out, and now we're putting on these amazing worship nights every once in a while at the warehouse. So how did you even like come across Anchored? How did that happen for you?
So yeah, like I said, when I first started leading worship, I had to like really grow into just how to be like a worship leader. I didn't know like a lot of what I know now. Like even in the prophetic, like I grew a lot, and I really, really, like, I wouldn't have grown as a worship leader if it wasn't for our pastor, because he gave me space to mess up. He gave me space to learn and grow as I was like leading worship. There's like many times that when we were at the house, like because when you start getting into prophetic worship, I know I'm kind of going off, but it kind of goes to like where I am now. Like when you're a prophetic person and you're learning, like I would feel everything. I would feel the weight of the room. I would feel like what people were feeling. And it was like so heavy sometimes, or not even just that, but even just the anointing. Like I didn't know how to steward the anointing. Like when God was there, I was like, so I had to learn all of that. And so, just by learning and doing all of that. But in that whole process, many times, I can tell you, there are so many times where like evangelists would come, or like prophetic people would come, prophets would come, and it was always the same word. They would tell me, you're going to write albums, you're going to release songs, like there's something inside of you, you're anointed, you're anointed to do this, and you're going to travel, and you're going to do this and that. And I remember it was always like this thing, to the point where like it got to the point where I would literally, whenever there was like a guest speaker, I knew that they were going to talk about it.
Really?
And they would talk about it. But it got to the point where I would even be like, God, please don't talk about worship. Like, just give me another word.
Yeah.
But it was always the same thing. And so up into Anchored, I had no resources, like zero. Like I didn't have any friends that were producers. And I would see like my other worship leader friends that had friends that were actually like producers, and they would help them. And I had no one. Like I literally was like, I'm like a lost like artist that has like nothing. Like I don't know how to record myself. I didn't know how to do anything. I was like, I literally don't know anybody, and I'm like, I have no resources.
Yeah.
And so there's maybe like 2 times I had gotten a prophetic word, and it was like, don't worry about the resources, like don't worry about it, God's gonna bring it, da da da. And so I was like, okay. So that was just like, it was always like a promise that I had. And the cool thing is that because it was so public, the words that they would give, like literally our whole church like knew about this.
Yeah.
So even just seeing where I am now, I know is a testimony to our church. And I think that's why they celebrate me so much, because they have seen like this promise come to pass. But yeah, it was just like this thing where I was like, I don't know anybody. And then 2020 hit, and rewind. My sister passed away in 2019, and I went through like a lot with that. And then 2020 came, and then in 2020 we had basically lost our whole band. Like it was just like me and Manny and Jojo. And I remember thinking like, okay, now how am I gonna write songs? Now how am I gonna like do albums? And like, I don't understand. And I was like going through this whole thing of like, I was struggling, because I'm like, Lord, you've promised me this, but like now I really don't have anybody. Like I feel like everyone left, and like, how am I gonna do this? But God,
Yes.
It's like, we forget how faithful the Lord is, that he will make a way literally when there is no way. And so I remember it was a Thursday night, and Pastor was like, Andrea, I have a word for you. And so I get up, and at that time he was sharing a lot about, I think the series was The Wise Master Builder. So he was speaking a lot about like dreams, like things that we have, desires that we have, and like how to make it happen, like write down the vision, make it plain, and make it happen, And so he was speaking on that, and I was getting so much revelation over it. I felt like the Lord was just like, see, like you can do it. Like you don't need anybody. Like not in that sense, but like you don't need like what you think you need. Like I'm gonna, like my idea of how it's supposed to work. He was like, no. And so I remember when we got up, he was ending, and I don't know why I knew that he was gonna give me a word. And then he called me, and I remember I even turned around to look at Steph, and I was like, I knew it. I remember I even told her, I was like, I knew it. And so then I get up, and I'm like, okay, Lord, like I know you're gonna speak to me.
Yeah.
And the first thing Pastor says is, don't worry. I mean, he said something about like just because you don't have a band, he said like, it doesn't matter. He's like, stop worrying about that.
Yeah.
And he said, God's gonna bring the resources to you. And he's like, for you to write those albums. And I remember I was just like, oh my gosh. And I remember crying, and I was like, dang, like in that moment, God just like spoke to me and was like, stop worrying about that. Like I could literally make a way where there is no way. Like I will make a way for you. And so I was like, okay. Literally that next day on a Friday, I get a call, and it's this guy named AJ, one of my friends that was working with Anchored. And he basically just like was like, we're interested in having you like be a part of this. Like, would you be interested, and if you are, like, we want to set up a meeting and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, what the heck is happening right now? And so I literally go back and I tell my father-in-law, and I'm just like, oh my gosh, like, I literally just got this call. And he's like, Andrea, not even 24 hours later.
Dang.
Like, the Lord, like, literally, he gives you the word, and then not even 24 hours later, he's already, like, starting it, And I was like, oh my gosh. But even just that whole process was very, very long, because I just felt like there was a lot that was, like, coming against me to, like, actually, like, finally sign with them. A lot of prayer, a lot of fasting, and but at the end, I kept getting confirmations. Like, people that didn't even know what was going on were giving me confirmation about it. And, the Lord was just speaking to me, and, I did it, and I signed, and it's been like the most fun journey. Even just, writing or finishing Burning One, and, all of that. But yeah, that's basically like what led me to that, and where I am now.
That's amazing. That prophetic word came to pass within 24 hours. That is so crazy.
Yeah, that's God.
That is so awesome. Well, what's next after Burning One? Do you have anything else like planned with Anchored?
Yeah, so right now we're just like writing. I've been writing. I've been co-writing with people, just getting with people, trying to write and stuff. And hopefully soon we'll do that second single, and then after that, then we're gonna do the next one. And so it's gonna be really good. Yeah,
I'm excited. Awesome. I'm so excited for you. It's so beautiful. Like I've told you, my mom is like one of your biggest fans. It's so funny. Like she came to the women's conference, and then you were worshiping. And I always talk about you guys, like my mom like knows of you guys from afar, right? And so I'm always like, oh yeah, Andrea, Manny, blah, blah, blah. And when she came to the women's conference, you were worshiping, and she was like, afterwards, she was like, the girl in the white blouse sings so pretty. And I was like, that's Drea. Like I always thought, she's like, oh, that's Drea. I was like, yeah. She's like, when her album comes out, I'm going to buy it.
I love her.
It's so funny. I was having this conversation with Michelle, and she was telling me how like her mom like loves you too. That like when you did that worship night.
Oh my gosh, I love her.
Right?
She's the sweetest girl.
So cute. And when you did that worship night with Brittany, like she specifically came for that because you were going to worship in Spanish. And I was like, oh my gosh, Michelle, my mom loves Drea too. I was like, what is it? She just like ministers to the moms, I guess.
Oh, I love that.
Right? But it's so awesome. Yeah. But I'm so excited to see like what's going to happen next, like your album, your next single. It's going to be so amazing. What advice would you have, Drea, for anybody who is like struggling to, whether they're a worship leader themselves or they're just someone who's in the congregation, because you guys have really ushered in this culture of worshiping freely. I've been to a few other churches, but the way that Harvest Time worships is just like next level of worshiping freely. Like it's just such a culture of worship that we've really developed here at Harvest Time, and you even shared with me that I don't even remember saying this, but I guess when I first came that I was like, I can't wait to worship freely, and now I'm like crazy. But what advice do you have for a worship leader who's really struggling to like find how they can do that, how they can, like how you were saying you had to really steward that gift of like really knowing like, okay, this heaviness that I feel, it's not mine, but it's what I'm feeling from the congregation, or like the anointing, like how do you like steer that? Or also just like someone who's in the congregation who's even struggling to like put their hands up during worship, like they feel it like just burning inside of them, like built up, but they don't know how to just like let go and let God. So like what advice would you have for people in that situation?
Yeah, I honestly, I feel like like I said, having a pastor that has given me so much room, it's kind of hard, but I would say even if you have 20 minutes of worship, because that's something that I hear often is like, well, but like my church, we can only worship for 20 minutes, and it's like, but think about what God can do in those 20 minutes.
Yeah.
He can do a lot. And I think like the root of how you allow God to move and how you allow yourself to be free is when you get rid of the fear of man, but also in your alone time. Like when you spend time with the Lord, start to become like him, and you start to get rid of that like fear of man, you know? And I'm not gonna lie, even sometimes when I'm up there, sometimes it's hard. Sometimes I'm like, I need to get over myself. Like, I need to get over this. Like, it's not about me. And I have to like let go, because there's times where like, it's hard when you're leading worship and you look over and people are just standing there staring, giving you the death stare.
Staring
like,
daggers at you.
yeah, that was like Chris Avedra. I forgive him. I love him.
Coach.
But for example, like him, you know, like I remember he was just like staring at me like
Would
he was
he
gonna kill me.
really?
Yeah. And but yeah, so just like getting to that point where you just, I don't know, you just don't care, and you're just like sometimes even when I'm up there, I'm just like I said, I have to tell myself, like I literally will push myself out of what I'm feeling, because there's times where I'm thinking too much, or I'm like oh, like what are people thinking, or like if I see like new people and I'm like, oh my gosh, like they're gonna think I'm like crazy or whatever. But like you just have to get to that point where you just don't care. And you know, because I've seen it so much, I've seen it happen so much where people will come in and they're so stiff because they don't know how to worship, you know. They're still learning. But then like 2 months later they're like jumping, you know. So it's like getting to that where you just think like what does it matter? Like this is for God, you know. And just kind of getting over yourself and like praising and worshiping, and just like do what you have to do to get there. And that's like what I always sometimes share here. I'm like, do what you have to do. If you have to go on the floor to like encounter him, go on the floor. If you have to pace around, if you have to walk to the back, if you have to walk to the front, like do whatever you have to do to get there. And the more that you do it, the more you start to create that like culture in your own life. And you know, just like within our church, like it starts with the head, and it's, you know, because pastor has given us that freedom, like it just became this thing where like God created that culture here. And now I feel like when people walk in, it's almost like they see everyone, and it's almost like oh, this is what we're supposed to do. And it's not as like awkward, or it's not as hard to like worship undignified, because your brothers and your sisters are doing it. You know, kind of like what happened with you, you know. Like at first you were like oh, I just wish I could. And I just remember telling you like, it's gonna happen. Like you just have to you have to just do it. Like you just have to come to that point where you're just like, I'm just gonna do it. And just like as soon as you do it, you're gonna feel the freedom. You know. And I think too, obviously, like the more free you are, the more closer you are to God, the more you're gonna want to express yourself in worship. You know, so my advice would just be that, just, you know, like get rid of that fear of man and take risks, you know. Like as a worship leader, like there's times where I would think I would hear from the Lord, and then I missed it, and but then that was it. I would get back up and I would keep learning, like, okay, Lord, that wasn't your voice, that was me. And then and you know, and then when I would hear him, and then I would nail it, and people, not like me, but like, you know, the Lord would use me and I would nail it, and then I would see the response, or I would see the shift happen in the room, and then I'd be like, okay, like that was you, you know. And just like learning to hear his voice, and knowing that you're gonna make mistakes, you're not perfect. And even as a leader, like being in the prophetic, anything that the Lord has given you in gifts, like you have to be a risk taker. Like you have to just sometimes jump. And there's gonna be times where you're gonna jump, you know, too soon, and you're not going to be ready, but that's how you learn. You know. And like the more that you make mistakes, it's the more that you learn, and you become a better leader. And you know, and that would be my advice.
That's so good though. I feel like you just hit it right on where you said like get rid of the fear of man. I think that's a big thing, where it's like, at least speaking from experience, like coming into the church, right? And like I was like really had to work through this like perfectionism thing that I had going for myself, of like always like not looking dumb type of thing, you know? And so when I first started coming to Harvest Time, that was the biggest thing for me. I was like, what if I look weird? Like, what if I make an ugly face and like someone's looking at me while I'm like screaming, you know, or just whatever. And that's why I held back so much from worshiping freely in the beginning. And of course I was learning and developing with the Lord, but that was a big thing, is like, how am I going to look to other people? But it gets to the point where it's like, who cares what other people think, because they didn't save you, you know? And it's like, it's God who saved you. It's Jesus who saved you. So it's like, he's worthy of us worshiping him freely. You know, he's worthy of us getting undignified, like you said. And, yeah, I think that's just a big thing. And like you were saying, like, your worship will like develop the more your relationship with God develops. And I think a big thing too is like, when I started worshiping more freely, it was like I would remember of like, okay, God, like you pulled me out of this and you completely changed me. And like that really stirred something up for me to like want to just go after it and worship and just like freely worship him. But you kind of answered my next question, which is, as a worship leader, like, did you really have to go through a process of like, how do I put this? Like toning down your ego, of like not letting your ego get in the way, or like not letting pride get in the way? Cause it's like, you're up there, you're on stage, you know, it's like you're front and center. Was there a process that you feel that like God had to take you through before you got to that point to like really not allow like ego and pride and like getting like a big head type of thing as you got to this place of worship? Is that something you had to go through with the Lord?
Oh yeah, definitely. I think that never goes away. I feel like you constantly have to not like battle that, because it's not like a battle. It's not something like that I struggle with, or that I think like a lot of the worship leaders struggle with. I think it's just more it's your flesh, you know. Sometimes your flesh is going to want to come up when you hear, you know, I'm like a big words of affirmation girl, so I feel like even with that, like I've had to learn like, okay, like even if I never hear another compliment again, like will I be okay, you know? But also like learning that being a worship leader is not my identity. Like I am a daughter first. And I learned that when I had to step down after my sister passed away. I couldn't lead worship. I just felt like I had to take a step back. And you'll hear a lot of like Christians say like, oh, like you should never like, you know, take a break, or you should never. But it's like, there's no condemnation in that. Like if you ever feel, side note, if you ever feel, because I hear this a lot and I'm like, I don't agree with that. I feel like it's okay sometimes to just rest and like to allow God to bring healing. And I'm so glad I did. And I'm so glad that we go to a church that has made a safe space for that, because if it wasn't for that, I don't know where I would be. But yeah, so like I feel like in that time, God was like really teaching me, because I remember like when I wasn't leading worship for a couple months, and I remember feeling like, who am I? And I was like, and I realized how much I had put my identity in worship leading. And in that time, God was like, I'm gonna really show you like who you are as a daughter first. And so I think also knowing that that's not your identity helps a lot, because then you're not so like, you don't put yourself like where you're like, oh, like this is who I am, you know, where it's like, yes, it's who you are in a sense, like that's what God has called you to do, but you're his daughter first, you know, you're a leader, like you're a lover of people, you're a lover of God first. And but yeah, like struggling or like kind of like fighting that temptation of like, oh, like it was me, and like, oh, it's all me, and like kind of doing that. I feel like, yeah, it just comes with like walking in humility. But also one thing I learned is when people tell you like, you did a great job, like say thank you. You don't have to like, okay, can I share my pet peeve?
Yes,
I'm gonna share this. I cannot stand when people tell someone like a worship leader like, oh, you did a good job, or like, wow, you're so anointed, and they say, oh, praise God, like praise God, like it's all him. I'm like, no, like yes, it's him, it's all him, but it's also you, like the Lord is using you. And that's something I learned, like that's false humility, like for you to be like, oh no, it wasn't me, like it was all God. It's like, no, like God chose you. So like, you know, you're created in his image, say thank you, you know. One thing I heard from Corey Asbury, this worship leader, he had said like, you know, when people say that you did a good job, say thank you. You know, it's like someone giving you flowers, but at the end of the day, you get those flowers and then you give it back to God and you say, God, this is for your glory, you know? And so like, I always have that in mind where I'm like, when people give me compliments or tell me, I'm like, okay. And I grab the bouquet of flowers and I give it back to him. And I'm like, Lord, this is for you, you know?
Yeah.
And so I just think, you know, always making sure that you check yourself, you examine your heart, like the Bible says, you know, to examine yourself. But also, I think the most important thing is having people around you that will check you. Because one thing, I've been around a lot of worship leaders, sadly, that have let their ego, like, and pride take over, and they have like the worst characters, and like they're one thing on stage, and then when they're off, it's like a completely different person. And I think because of that, I really learned a lot because of that, because I always saw that and I said, I don't ever want to be like that. And so I would always, and even to this day, I always tell myself, like, Andrea, be approachable, but also be very intentional with people. Like, even if you're up there, like, go down, say hi to people, you know, like, and it's crazy because there's been times where I've done that, and then they'll tell me like later on, you know, they'll tell me like, man, like, you coming to talk to me and then you going up there meant so much to me, because like, I would never expect you to come talk to me, because all the worship leaders at the other church I went to, like, they just acted like their poop didn't stink, you know, like they would just get off the stage and not say hi to anybody and like just didn't care, you know, and like you weren't like that, you know, and that's what made me want to stay. And I was like, oh my gosh, just being intentional, like just being loving, and like when you have a platform like that, you know, and like I said, being intentional, saying hi to people, and like just reminding yourself, like, you're no better than them, you know, like you're just up there because the favor of God, and he gave you that because he knew that you can do it. But at the end of the day, like, you couldn't do this without the Lord, you know? And yeah, just like I said, like always examining yourself and having those people that are going to check you. I remember telling my best friends one time, because I'm telling you, I would see these like worship leaders, like, and I'd be like, man, like, why are they like that? Like, I remember this one worship leader, my brother told me that it was a really well-known worship leader, and he caught him like in the hallway or something, and he was like, hey, like, you know, so-and-so, like, I know you, you know, like he wanted to say hi to him. And literally this worship leader looks at my brother and just goes and walks away. Didn't even say hi, nothing. And my brother was so hurt. Like, he was disappointed more. Like, he was just like, dang, like, I really liked you, you know? Like, what did he say?
He's like socking the air over there.
Yeah, but it's like, I think just seeing that, I'm like that's like so wrong, you know? And so I think just I remember, like, just because I've grown, like, kind of seen those things like that happen. I remember telling my friends one time, I was like, if I ever get big-headed, or if I ever act like, you know, like that, or I start acting weird, like, I give you permission to slap me. Like, if I start being weird, please slap me. And they're like, okay, you know? And so, like, I've always had like that accountability. And I think for me, like, yeah, I just feel like there's no need to like act that way, you know? And it's like, you have to love people. And so, yeah, but I think, like I said, like, when people compliment you, because I would hear that all the time, like you're anointed, and, you know, to this day, you know, like, you're so anointed, and like, oh my gosh, when you go up there, and I think it was, sometimes it was hard, because then I would think like, oh, like, I could do this in my own strength, and like, oh, I could do, like, this is like me, like, this is what I'm doing, kind of thing. But it's just a constant thing, and what I mean by it still happens to this day is because when you're up there and you do and you shift, like, God uses you to shift a room, and you know that if God didn't use you, it probably wouldn't happen, like, in that time. Like, it's so easy to be like, oh, I did it, you know? But I think it's just constant. And this is what I do, is like, I'm constantly reminded, and I'm self-aware of like my thoughts, and I'm like, okay, like, no, Lord, like, it's not about me. It's not about me. Like, yes, you partnered with me and you used me, but it's for your glory. You know, it's about you. It's about you. And I think it's just not allowing yourself to lose sight of God. And, you know, because even like being signed, it's so easy to get lost in like the, you know, the you go into like the money part and like all this stuff, like, you know, like I said, money gets involved and like, you know, like just different things get involved, and like it's so easy to just lose sight of like why you're there and like what you're doing. But I'm so thankful for the people around me, because I know that they would tell me like it is, but also like I've grown because I've seen it happen around me, that I'm like, I don't want to be like that. I never want to be like that. I never want to not be approachable. Like, I always want to be approachable. I always want to try my hardest, as hard as it is, because obviously I don't get to say hi to everybody, but like as hard as it is like making that like commitment to, and that's, it's like a sacrifice of it's like a sacrifice. It's like a sacrifice that I can offer the Lord in like being intentional and like talking to people, you know, because it, like I said, it's so easy to just be in your own world and just be like, okay, like, you know, but I think just being intentional and walking with humility and just always being I know I keep repeating myself, but like being self-aware, you know.
But it's so true though. And like one thing I always appreciated about you, and like also Manny too, because it's like coming into just Christianity as a whole, because, you know, when I got saved, like I knew nothing about Christianity, and like my whole life was stripped away from me, and I really had nothing other than Alyssa. Like that's my best friend, and I knew nothing, right? But then I was like, hey, like what church do you go to? And so she would like start talking to me about harvest time, and I was like, whoa, like that's so cool, like this church. And then to see how you guys were like doing ministry, and I was like, that's so awesome. And it's like, you know, you're the worship leader, you know, your pastor's daughter-in-law, and then there's Manny's pastor's son, and like I kind of like in my own way, I guess, like put you guys on this pedestal, because like I didn't know any better, you know. I knew nothing about church, knew nothing about anything, and so I kind of like put you guys on this pedestal, because I was like, oh, that's like pastor's family, like they're the Santillanos, you know. But then here I come into harvest time, and you guys are just so humble. Like you guys are so humble, and you guys just go out of your way to like talk to me and make me feel welcomed, and like never made me feel like I was just like this like stranger, like this weird person who just like came out of New Age, like, oh, that girl does witchcraft, like don't talk to her, you know. You guys never ever made me feel that way. You guys just made me feel like family and welcomed, and it's so amazing and it's so beautiful. I feel like it should be like that everywhere, you know. So I feel like that's why it's like people really should check their egos, because that's what this whole thing is about. It's like, you know, saving the lost and helping the lost and helping them feel love. Like that's what people are looking for, is like just love. And yeah, you guys really demonstrated that. So I'm very grateful, you know, that you guys always like had me feel like a part of harvest time from the very beginning. So I'm very grateful for the culture you guys have here, and just for everything that you guys do for the congregation, because you guys sacrifice a lot. Like you guys are up and down everywhere all the time, and, you know, and it's just like you guys have such a heart for people, and it's so beautiful. And it's so beautiful that we get to see that firsthand as soon as we walk in with worship, you know. So it's awesome. But thank you so much, Drea, for sharing your story and your testimony.
Thank you for having me.
Yes. Thank you for opening up. I love how much you share. It's so awesome. And I know you have been creating a lot of content, doing a lot of your singing and stuff on Instagram and TikTok. So where can people find you on platforms? What's your app?
You can @ me. It's just Andrea_Santillano. And that's on TikTok and Instagram.
Awesome.
Basically the only platforms I have. Okay,
perfect. Well, thank you so much, Drea.
Thank you for having me.
Appreciate it. And thank you guys for tuning in to another episode of Against the Grain podcast. Please be sure to like, comment, subscribe, all the things, and support the podcast. We appreciate you guys, and tune in to the next episode.